There are motorcycles that impress you with horsepower figures, electronic sophistication, and the sheer quantity of technology squeezed between their wheels. Then there are motorcycles that make you turn around for another look after you have parked them. The 2026 Royal Enfield Continental GT 650 belongs firmly in the second camp. Royal Enfield has resisted the temptation to transform its Café racer into something it was never intended to be. There is no dramatic horsepower increase, no semi-active suspension, and no bewildering collection of electronic riding modes. Instead, the Continental GT 650 continues to offer something increasingly unusual. A handsome, relatively simple motorcycle built around an engaging parallel twin engine and sold at a price that remains within reach of ordinary riders. For 2026, that formula still makes an enormous amount of sense. Royal Enfield currently lists the Continental GT 650 in the UK from £6,949 on the road for the Apex Grey and Slipstream Blue versions. At a time when many modern classics have moved decisively upmarket, the GT 650 remains one of the most accessible ways into a genuinely convincing Café racer. And arguably, it has never looked better. The Continental GT 650 proves you don't need 100 horsepower and a mountain of electronics to make a motorcycle entertaining. The Continental GT has always been the sporting member of Royal Enfield's 650 family. Its basic mechanical package is familiar, but the riding experience is substantially different from the more upright Interceptor. Clip-on style handlebars, rear set foot controls, the sculpted fuel tank and Café racer riding position give the Continental a personality of its own. The inspiration is obvious. This is Royal Enfield looking back towards the Café racer movement of the 1960s, when riders stripped weight from their motorcycles, fitted lower handlebars, and attempted to extract every ounce of performance from relatively modest engines. Thankfully, the modern GT doesn't require its owner to spend Saturday afternoon rejetting carburettors before enjoying Sunday morning. Fuel injection, ABS, electric starting, and an LED headlight bring enough modern convenience to the package without fundamentally changing its old-school character. Royal Enfield has also introduced cast alloy wheels on the blacked-out variants, allowing the use of tubeless tyres, while updated aluminium switchgear and a USB charging port add some welcome everyday practicality. It is modern where it needs to be, traditional where it matters. Central to the Continental GT's appeal remains Royal Enfield's 647.95 cubic centimetres air-cooled parallel twin. Official figures put maximum output at 34.9 kilowatts, roughly 47 brake horsepower, with 52.3 Newton meters of torque at 5,150 revolutions per minute, delivered through a 6-speed gearbox. On paper, those figures aren't particularly exciting. On the road, that's almost irrelevant. This is an engine designed around usable performance rather than headline numbers. The throttle response is friendly, torque arrives progressively, and there is enough low and mid-range shove to make the motorcycle entertaining without constantly pushing you towards licence-threatening speeds. Open the throttle exiting a second or third gear corner and the GT gathers momentum with a satisfying mechanical enthusiasm. It doesn't explode towards the horizon, instead it encourages you to use the gearbox, carry corner speed and enjoy the process of riding. That distinction matters. On significantly faster motorcycles, a couple of seconds of full throttle can put you well beyond sensible road speeds. The Royal Enfield allows its rider to work the engine harder and enjoy considerably more of its performance considerably more often. The 6-speed gearbox complements the engine nicely, and once rolling, the GT feels considerably livelier than its specifications suggest. There is also something wonderfully appropriate about the engine's appearance. Those prominent cylinders and polished cases form an important part of the motorcycle's visual identity. Royal Enfield could undoubtedly extract considerably more performance from a modern liquid-cooled engine, but doing so might completely miss the point. At 212 kilograms curb weight, the Continental GT isn't particularly light. Royal Enfield quotes a 1,398mm wheelbase, 174mm of ground clearance, and an 820mm seat height. Yet once moving, the weight becomes considerably less noticeable. The riding position places more weight towards the front than on a conventional roadster, giving the rider a stronger sense of connection with the front tyre. It immediately encourages a more committed approach to corners. The chassis itself is reassuringly predictable. Turning is progressive rather than razor sharp, and once settled into a corner, the GT holds its line confidently. On a flowing British B road, where outright horsepower matters considerably less than rhythm, the Continental can be extremely entertaining. You find yourself concentrating on braking points, choosing the right gear, and maintaining momentum. In other words, you're riding the motorcycle rather than supervising its electronics. The suspension remains relatively straightforward, with conventional telescopic forks at the front and twin gas-charged rear shock absorbers with preload adjustment. At moderate speeds it works well. Push considerably harder over broken surfaces and its budget origins become more apparent. Previous testing of the GT has also highlighted the softer suspension as an area where the motorcycle can begin to feel less composed when ridden aggressively. But that limitation rarely destroys the experience. Instead, you adapt your riding accordingly, and there is something rather satisfying about that. Braking is handled by a 320mm front disc and 240mm rear disc, backed by dual-channel ABS. Stopping performance is perfectly adequate for the motorcycle's performance envelope. There is enough power for everyday riding and enough control for enthusiastic road use, although riders coming directly from modern sports machinery may initially want more immediate bite and feedback from the front. Again, context matters. This is a sub-50 brake horsepower Café racer, rather than a 150 brake horsepower superbike. The brakes do their job without attempting to turn every approach to a roundabout into a MotoGP qualifying lap. Here we reach one of the GT's biggest compromises. It looks like a Café racer because it is a Café racer. The handlebars are low, the footrests are positioned rearwards, and the rider is placed into a noticeably sportier stance than on the Interceptor 650. For shorter journeys and Sunday morning blasts, it feels absolutely right. The tank sits between your knees, your upper body naturally leans forwards, and suddenly even a trip for a coffee feels like an excuse to take the interesting route. Spend several hours aboard, however, and wrists, shoulders and knees may start reminding you that style sometimes requires sacrifice. Comfort will depend enormously on rider height and flexibility. Previous long-distance testing has demonstrated that the GT can actually be more comfortable than its appearance suggests, but there is no escaping the fact that its ergonomics are sportier than the Interceptors. For commuting through heavy traffic or long-distance touring, we'd choose something more upright. For a sunny Sunday morning, give us the GT. Walk away from the Continental GT and you'll probably look back. That's perhaps the simplest compliment we can give it. The sculpted tank dominates the silhouette, complemented by the compact tail, twin exhausts, round headlight and exposed parallel twin engine. There is remarkably little visual clutter. Where some retro motorcycles look like modern machines wearing vintage fancy dress, the Continental feels far more authentic. The LED headlight adds modern lighting performance without destroying the traditional appearance, while Royal Enfield's alloy wheel variants provide a slightly more contemporary blacked-out personality. The overall design remains beautifully proportioned. It also provides an excellent foundation for customization. Exhausts, seats, mirrors, screens, engine covers, and numerous cosmetic components are available, making the GT exactly the sort of motorcycle that can gradually evolve with its owner. You can leave it completely standard, few owners will. A 12.5 litre fuel tank means the GT isn't designed for continent crossing distances between stops. although the relatively economical twin helps compensate. Its simplicity is also part of its appeal. There aren't multiple rider modes to configure before leaving home. There isn't a TFT display presenting endless menus. You don't need to select throttle maps, suspension settings or engine braking levels. Turn the key, start the engine, ride. For some riders that simplicity might appear basic. For the Continental GT's intended audience, we'd argue it is a feature. The modern classic market is considerably more competitive than it was when the 650 twins originally appeared. Triumph remains the obvious premium alternative, particularly for riders wanting stronger performance and more sophisticated components. But moving into Triumph territory generally requires a considerably larger budget. Royal Enfield's own Interceptor 650 is perhaps the GT's most serious rival. It shares the fundamental 650 twin character, but provides a more relaxed, upright riding position. Royal Enfield currently lists the Interceptor from £7,049 in the UK, making the GT an interesting proposition for riders who specifically want the Café racer aesthetic. There are also numerous retro roadsters and modern classics available from other manufacturers, but few combine a genuine Café racer riding position, twin-cylinder engine, and this level of visual authenticity at the Royal Enfield's price. That remains the GT's trump card. It isn't trying to beat £10,000 plus motorcycles specification for specification, it's offering something different. The 2026 Royal Enfield Continental GT 650 isn't the fastest motorcycle in its class. It doesn't have the most sophisticated suspension, the strongest brakes or the longest equipment list, and none of that stops us liking it enormously. Royal Enfield understands that a modern classic needs to deliver something beyond measurable performance. It needs character. It needs to make its owner want to open the garage door simply to look at it. Most importantly, it needs to make an ordinary Sunday morning ride feel like an occasion. The Continental GT does exactly that. Its engine is accessible enough for relatively inexperienced riders, but sufficiently engaging to entertain experienced motorcyclists. Its chassis rewards smooth riding, its styling continues to look fantastic, and its relative simplicity feels increasingly refreshing in a market becoming dominated by screens, menus and electronics. Yes, we'd like slightly better suspension, we'd appreciate stronger front brake feel, and anyone planning regular motorway journeys might prefer the riding position of the Interceptor. But improving those things inevitably risks increasing the price, and affordability is fundamental to the GT's appeal. At £6,749 upwards, the Continental GT 650 continues to deliver something many increasingly expensive modern classics struggle to replicate: a convincing old-school motorcycling experience without old-school reliability worries or a premium price tag. It proves that enjoying a motorcycle isn't about how much horsepower you've got. Sometimes it's about how much of it you can actually use.
Become one of our YouTube members and save. For a £5 monthly membership fee, get 2 digital issues of Modern Classic, motorcycle news magazine for the price of one per month.